The morning Brooke told me she was pregnant should have been the greatest moment of our marriage. We had been trying for over a year. Doctor's appointments, temperature charts, ovulation kits, supplements lined up on the bathroom counter like soldiers. I had spent 12 months imagining exactly what that moment would look like. Her face, my reaction, the coffee getting cold on the counter because neither of us would remember to drink it. What I never pictured was standing in our kitchen in Brentwood, Tennessee, watching my wife hold a positive pregnancy test with her eyes fixed on the floor, and realizing, before she said a single word, that something was catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. Because the look on her face wasn't joy, it was guilt. And when the truth finally came out, after 3 hours of silence, 2 attempts at a half-truth, and 1 sentence I will hear for the rest of my life, I learned that my wife of 7 years had been conducting an affair for 11 months straight, and the baby she was carrying belonged to another man entirely. Her family's response? Nathan, be mature about this, accept it, and move on. What I did next shocked every single one of them. My name is Nathan Garrett. I am 41 years old. I am a structural engineer at a mid-size firm based in Nashville, Tennessee. For the past 14 years, I have designed bridges and overpasses across the Southeast, structures built to carry weight, to hold under pressure, to outlast the forces working against them. I was good at this work because I understood load-bearing points. I understood where something could fail before it did. The bitter irony is that I never saw where my own life was about to give way. Brooke and I met in the spring of 2016 at a birthday dinner in the East Nashville neighborhood near Five Points. She was working as a pharmaceutical sales representative, knew half the people in the restaurant, and had a laugh so genuine you could hear it from across a crowded room. I asked for her number before dessert arrived. She gave it to me before the entree was even cleared. We dated for 2 years, got engaged at sunset on the Cumberland River pedestrian bridge downtown. She insisted on a bridge, knowing what I did for a living, and I let her think it was her idea. And married at the Hermitage Hotel in October 2018. 94 guests, a string quartet, and a reception that ran long past midnight. Her father Glenn gave a toast that made even the waitstaff stop working. Her mother Diane cried from the moment Brooke walked out in her dress to the moment the last dance ended. For the first 4 years, our marriage was everything I had hoped. We bought a 4-bedroom house on a quiet street in Brentwood where kids still rode bikes in the evenings and neighbors still brought food when someone was sick. Brooke's pharmaceutical career was thriving. My work was steady and meaningful. When we decided, in late 2022, to start trying for a family, I genuinely believed we were entering the best chapter of our lives together. I was wrong. I just didn't have the full information yet. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in my position. Would you have confronted her the moment you suspected something? Would you have walked away quietly? Or would you have done what I did, and waited until you had everything? Like this video if you want more stories like this. It helps people who need to hear this find it. Now let's get back into it. The signs were there. I understand that now. Looking back with the clarity that only comes after the fact, it is almost difficult to believe I didn't connect them sooner. But when you trust someone, when trust has been a baseline assumption for 7 years, you develop a kind of blindness to the evidence right in front of you. You explain it away, not because you are naive, but because the alternative explanation is too costly to accept. Brooke's hours began shifting in February of 2023. That part wasn't immediately alarming. Pharmaceutical sales representatives work long and unpredictable hours, dinners with physicians, hospital administrator events, territory conferences. I had understood the demands of her career from the beginning, but by late winter the hours weren't shifting in a professional direction. They were shifting in a direction that didn't match her calendar. She'd mention a regional conference in Knoxville running through Thursday. She wouldn't get home until Saturday afternoon. She'd say she had a dinner with a physician group in Franklin, 15 minutes from our house in Brentwood, and wouldn't walk through the door until nearly 11 at night. I asked questions. I received answers. Reasonable answers. Plausible answers. The kind of answers that make a man feel like the problem for having asked in the first place. Then came what I think of as the phone shift. For 7 years, Brooke had left her phone everywhere without a second thought. On the kitchen counter charging, face up. Handed to me for directions while she drove. Read to me in bed from funny texts her coworker had sent. Somewhere in the spring of 2023, that openness disappeared quietly and completely. The phone went everywhere with her, face down on every flat surface, into the bathroom during long showers, on her side of the bed each night, slid just slightly under her pillow. I noticed it the way you notice a change in the quality of light, not alarming in the moment, just different, filed away. Told myself it meant nothing. The third sign was the subtlest and the hardest to name. It was the way she laughed, not with me, around me. References to conversations I had not been part of. Inside language that didn't track back to anyone I knew. A low, quiet current of disconnection that I kept trying to dismiss as stress, as the difficulty of the fertility process, as the ordinary friction that long marriages sometimes accumulate. It didn't occur to me, or rather, I didn't let it occur to me, that she wasn't disconnecting from our marriage in general. She was connecting to something specific somewhere else. The moment I could no longer look away arrived on a Wednesday night in September 2023. I came home from a job site in Murfreesboro earlier than expected. The house was quiet. Brooke's car was in the driveway. I walked in through the garage door, set my keys on the hook by the laundry room, and heard her voice carrying from the dining room, low, careful, the way people speak when they believe they are alone. I stood in the hallway and listened without moving. I know. Just a little more time. He doesn't suspect anything. I'll figure it out. She came around the corner 30 seconds later and found me standing there. Her face went white, not pale white, and then in a span of about 2 heartbeats, she composed herself. "Hey, you're home early," a smile that stopped somewhere around her cheekbones. "I was just talking to Alyssa. She and Dad are at it again." Alyssa was her younger sister. Glenn was their father. They did have a complicated relationship. The explanation was plausible. I nodded. I walked to the kitchen. I started heating up leftovers. But I heard every word she had said before she came around that corner, and I never once forgot them. Over the following 6 weeks, I did what I am trained to do when I suspect a structure has a problem I cannot yet see. I gathered data. Quietly. Methodically. Without changing anything visible on the surface. I hired a private investigator named Patrick Reeves. He was a former Metro Nashville Police Department detective, 15 years on the force, who had shifted into private work about 8 years prior and operated a small firm out of an office on Charlotte Pike on the west side of the city. I found him through a referral from a colleague who had used him during a custody case 2 years earlier and described him as thorough, discreet, and impossible to rattle. I called Patrick from a parking garage near my office on a Tuesday morning. I told him what I needed. He did not ask how I was feeling about it. He asked for facts: Brooke's daily schedule, the make and plate of her vehicle, her workplace address, and any names she had mentioned with unusual frequency. He told me I'd have preliminary findings within 2 weeks. He had them in 10 days. The man's name was Tyler Weston. 36 years old, divorced, no children. Regional sales director for a medical device company, which is precisely how he and Brooke had met at a pharmaceutical and medical technology conference in Charlotte, North Carolina in December of 2022. According to Patrick's surveillance records, the relationship had been ongoing since approximately January 2023, 11 months. Tyler's apartment was in the Green Hills neighborhood of Nashville, 12 minutes from our house in Brentwood. They had dinner at Josephine on 21st Avenue South. They walked the trails at Radnor Lake State Natural Area on weekday mornings when Brooke told me she had early territory calls. They checked into a hotel near Nashville International Airport on 4 separate occasions that Patrick had documented with timestamps and photographs. I sat in Patrick's office after he finished talking and held the folder without opening it. Just held it in my hands for probably 20 minutes. "You all right?" Patrick asked. "No," I said, "but I'm going to be." I drove home that evening and made dinner. Chicken thighs, roasted vegetables, a simple vinaigrette on the salad. I set the table. I poured water. We talked about our days, about the neighbors whose kitchen renovation had been dragging on for 3 weeks, about a news story Brooke had heard on the radio. I said nothing about any of it. I had more to do first. The next morning I called David Ashby, a family law attorney with offices in the Cool Springs area south of Nashville. A college roommate had used him years ago in a difficult divorce and said he was the kind of lawyer who was 3 moves ahead before you even sat down at the table. That turned out to be exactly right. "Before anything else," David said at our first meeting, setting his pen down and looking at me directly. "Tell me everything. The timeline, the property, the finances, all of it." I told him everything. He took careful notes, asked precise follow-up questions, and at the end of 90 minutes laid out a course of action with the clean efficiency of a well-engineered plan. Every component fitted to the next, no wasted movement. "Don't confront her yet," David said. "I need to get the documentation in order first. And Nathan, nothing changes in your daily behavior. Nothing at all." I went home and continued behaving like a man who had no idea his marriage was built on a fault line. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in late November 2023, Brooke sat me down at the kitchen table. She was holding a pregnancy test. She had been crying before I sat down. I could see it in her face. And the expression she wore when she looked at me was one I had never seen on her before, not in 7 years of marriage. It was the face of someone who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and can no longer hold it up. She told me she was pregnant. Then she told me she wasn't certain the baby was mine. And when I asked her to be honest with me, fully, completely, no more managed information, she told me the truth. She had done the math. The timing made it impossible. The baby belonged to Tyler Weston. She cried through all of it. She reached for my hand twice. I didn't pull away, but I didn't close my fingers around hers either. When she finished, there was a silence in that kitchen that felt total. "How long?" I asked. 11 months, she said quietly. "Were you going to tell me it all?" The pause before her answer lasted long enough to be its own answer. "I don't know," she said finally. I almost respected the honesty of that more than any rehearsed explanation would have deserved. I stood up. I told her I needed time. I got in my truck and drove to my brother Connor's house in the Germantown neighborhood of Memphis. He lives there now, runs a commercial landscaping business, has been married to his wife Vanessa for 14 years. And I sat at his kitchen table and told him everything. The investigator, David Ashby, the folder, the timeline, all of it. Connor did not try to redirect me. He did not offer a single piece of unsolicited advice. He just listened the way a good brother listens, completely and without interruption, until everything was out. "What are you going to do?" he asked when I was done. "Everything David told me to," I said. "Now I need you to understand what happened next, because this is the part of the story that went sideways in a direction I was not prepared for." The morning after I told Brooke I was consulting a lawyer, her mother Diane drove over from Nolensville without calling. She let herself into our house with the spare key she had held for 3 years, and sat herself down at our dining room table, with the composure of a woman who had rehearsed the conversation on the 45-minute drive over. "Nathan," Diane said carefully, "I want to start by acknowledging that what Brooke did was wrong. I'm not here to excuse her." I waited. "But she is my daughter. She is pregnant. And right now, what this family needs is for everyone to pause, take a breath, and think about what is actually practical here." I asked her to be specific. "She made a terrible mistake," Diane said. "But that baby is coming into the world regardless of what any of us decide. Brooke needs stability right now, not a war. I'm asking you, as a mature, reasonable man who I've known for 7 years, to give this situation the time and the grace it deserves before you do something that can't be undone." "Something like what?" I asked. "Like involving lawyers. Like turning a private family matter into a legal battle that damages everyone involved." I told her that lawyers were already involved. David Ashby had filed the initial divorce petition that morning. The composure in Diane's face cracked, just slightly, but I saw it. "Nathan, please, be mature about this. Accept the situation. Brooke made a mistake, but your marriage doesn't have to end because of it." I looked at her for a long moment. "Diane," I said, keeping my voice level, "your daughter is carrying another man's child. 11 months is not a mistake. A mistake is a bad decision made once. What your daughter did was a decision made and renewed every single day for nearly a year." Diane straightened in her chair. "We're asking you to be the bigger person here, Nathan." "I am," I said. "I'm being exactly the person I need to be." She left an hour later without saying goodbye. Glenn called the next morning. Glenn was a quieter man than Diane, retired pharmacist, deliberate with words, someone I had genuinely liked from the beginning. But he called to deliver the same message in a quieter package. "Son," he said. He had always called me that. "I know how much pain you're in, but Brooke is going to need you. That child is going to need stability. I'm asking you, as a man who loves my daughter and has been part of this family, what kind of man do you want to be through this?" "Glenn," I said, "I've been thinking about exactly that." "Nathan, listen to me. I want to be an honest one," I said. "That's what I'm going to be." A pause, then quietly, "Her attorney is going to make things very difficult for you if you push this." And there it was. The gentle family appeal had a hard edge underneath it, and it had just shown itself. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, and I ended the call. Alyssa, Brooke's younger sister, the same woman Brooke had claimed to be talking to on the phone the night I heard her in the dining room, came to the house 2 days after that. She stood in the doorway and bypassed the compassion angle entirely. "You need to drop the divorce," she said. "Brooke is scared and pregnant, and you are making everything worse." "I'm not making anything," I said. "I'm responding to what was already made." "Tyler doesn't want to be involved," Alyssa said. "She told me, so if you leave, she'll be alone with a newborn. Is that what you want for her?" I want you to hear that sentence. Is that what you want for her? As if the consequences of Brooke's choices were something I was actively choosing to inflict. "Alyssa," I said, "I want you to think very carefully about what you just said to me." She left without responding. I closed the door and stood in my hallway for a long time. Here is what I did next. Everything I am about to describe was legal, deliberate, and measured. I am not a man who operates from rage. I am an engineer. I solve problems by understanding how forces interact, how weight is distributed, where stress accumulates before a structure fails. I understood the forces in this situation with complete clarity, and I responded accordingly. David Ashby and I had built a strong case from the beginning. The house in Brentwood had been purchased substantially with assets I brought into the marriage, a down payment sourced from savings I had accumulated before we met, supplemented by an inheritance from my grandfather that I had invested carefully in the years prior to our wedding. David had the documentation for all of it. Tennessee operates under equitable distribution laws rather than community property, meaning marital assets are divided based on what is fair given the full circumstances, not automatically split in half. The photographs, the surveillance timeline, the financial records, all of it was now part of a legal filing. Brooke's attorney, a woman named Carla Finch with a reputation in Nashville legal circles for aggressive settlement negotiation, contacted David 2 days after the filing was served. David called me that afternoon. "They want to move toward settlement quickly," he said. "Why?" I asked. "Because they expected you to file in anger without preparation. Instead, you filed with 8 weeks of documented evidence. That changes the conversation." The next thing I did was call Tyler Weston, not for confrontation. I want to be clear about that. I called him for one specific purpose: to establish, on record, his intentions regarding the child. He didn't answer the first 2 calls. On the third, he picked up. "I think we should talk," I said. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said. "Tyler," I said, "I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because there is a child coming into the world, and that child is going to exist regardless of how uncomfortable this conversation is. I need to understand what your intentions are." A long silence. "I'm not in a position to be a father right now," he said. "I told Brooke that." "Did you tell her that before or after the affair started?" No answer. "The courts will establish paternity and support obligations regardless," I said. "I'm giving you the opportunity to get ahead of it on your own terms." I ended the call and forwarded the recording to David. In Tennessee, one-party recording consent laws applied fully. David used it. The third thing I did was the simplest and, I think, the most significant. I stopped managing the feelings of Brooke's family. For 7 years I had been the peacemaker in that household, the quiet, reasonable son-in-law who smoothed things over, who redirected tense conversations, who absorbed friction so that everyone else could remain comfortable. I had done it naturally, without resentment, because I believed in the marriage and in the family it had connected me to. I sent Diane, Glenn, and Alyssa each a brief formal letter, not an email, a written letter delivered by mail. In it, I stated clearly that I would have no further communication with them during the legal proceedings except through David Ashby's office, that I wished them no harm, that I expected no further contact at my home or my workplace. Diane called 4 times in the 2 days that followed. I did not answer. Glenn sent a long text message about integrity and the kind of man my father had raised me to be. I read it once and did not respond. Alyssa drove to my office building and was turned away by the front desk. I understand how this might sound. Cold, calculated. But I want you to understand what the alternative was. The alternative was giving continued access to my decision-making to people who had already asked me to absorb a 11-month affair and accept another man's child as a condition of remaining in my marriage. That access was no longer available. Connor drove up from Memphis on a Friday night and we sat on my back porch for 3 hours. At some point, he set down his beer and asked me how I was really doing. Not logistically, not strategically, but actually. I thought about the answer for a while before I gave it. I'm grieving, I said, but I can see the other side of it now. First week, I couldn't. Now I can. He nodded slowly. What does the other side look like? Like a life that belongs to me, I said. The divorce was finalized 7 months after filing, in the summer of 2024. The settlement reflected the documented circumstances accurately. I retained the house in Brentwood, which the court determined had been funded substantially by premarital assets and inheritance. The marital savings were divided with a larger portion allocated to me, reflecting a financial imbalance that David had uncovered during the mandatory disclosure process. In the 11 months of the affair, Brooke had spent nearly $14,000 on Tyler Weston. Hotel rooms in Nashville and other cities. Flights, dinners, gifts. $14,000, redirected away from our shared life and into another one she was running alongside it. No alimony was awarded. In Tennessee, adultery is a recognized factor in alimony determinations. The judge applied it. Tyler Weston was established as the biological father through court-ordered paternity testing. He was assigned child support obligations that his attorney reportedly described to him as non-negotiable. He relocated to Atlanta within 3 months of the ruling. The payments, from what I have since heard, have not been consistent. Brooke moved into a rental apartment in Murfreesboro. The pharmaceutical sales career required significant restructuring after the baby arrived. Tyler was largely absent. The family support that Diane and Glenn had offered in the language of urgency had, in practice, its limits, especially when the reality of a grandchild in a difficult single-parent situation arrived alongside their retirement years. I say none of this with satisfaction. There is a child in the world who had nothing to do with any of the choices that shaped the circumstances of their birth. That child deserves every good thing. I hope they receive it, but I cannot be the one to provide it. People who know this story have asked me, my brother, the colleagues I've told over time, whether I regret not trying to save the marriage, whether if Brooke had come to me honestly before the pregnancy, before the 11 months had turned irreversible, things might have been different. I have thought about that question seriously and without defensiveness. Honestly, maybe. If there had been a genuine moment of truth early enough, when something real was still retrievable, I don't believe that all betrayals are equivalent. I don't believe that every marriage should end at the first sign of failure. Marriage is harder than most people admit before they're in one, and the difficulty isn't a reason to walk away. But 11 months is not an impulse. It is not a moment of weakness that cascaded into something larger. 11 months is a parallel life, constructed with deliberate effort and maintained through daily repeated choice. 11 months is someone looking at you every morning and deciding again, consciously with full information, that you don't deserve the truth. There is no return path from that. Not for me. What I found on the other side surprised me. I had expected emptiness, the flat, gray feeling of a life with the center removed. What I found instead was something closer to the feeling of setting down a weight that you have been carrying for so long you had stopped noticing its heaviness. The house was quiet in a way that used to feel like absence and now felt like peace. I cooked what I actually wanted to eat. I worked late without negotiating it. I drove out to a job site in Dixon County on a cold Saturday morning and stood on the framework of an unfinished overpass and watched the early light come across the hills and thought, this is still a very good life. 6 months after the divorce, I had dinner with a woman named Claire Mendez. She was a landscape architect who had worked with Connor's company on a commercial project in East Nashville. Connor's wife Vanessa arranged the introduction with the cheerful, blunt efficiency that only a happily married woman with good intentions and no patience for subtlety can manage. Claire and I had dinner at a quiet restaurant on Gallatin Avenue and talked for 3 hours without running out of things to say. I didn't tell her the full story that night. That story takes time, and some things should be offered only after they've been earned on both sides. But I told her I had been through something difficult. And she looked at me the way honest people look at each other, straight on, without calculation, and said, "That's okay. So have I." We have been seeing each other for 4 months. I am not in a hurry. I am not trying to fill a space or replace something. I am letting something grow at its own pace. The way good things should be built, foundation first, and then everything else. Here is what I want to leave you with. This story is not really about adultery or divorce proceedings or court filings, even though all of those things happened exactly as I described them. Those are the machinery. The story underneath them is about something simpler and more important. It is about what happens when someone tries to make your dignity negotiable. Brooks' family came to me dressed in the language of maturity. Be the bigger person. Accept the situation. Be reasonable. Think about what's practical and what they actually meant. If you strip the phrasing away and look at the structure underneath. Was this: take what was done to you and carry it quietly so that no one else has to be uncomfortable. I have heard from people who made that choice, who absorbed the betrayal, who accepted what could not be accepted, who told themselves that loving someone meant carrying things that had never been theirs to carry. Some of those people are still in those situations years later, still managing the feelings of the people who wronged them, still calling it maturity. I chose differently. Not from anger. Anger burns the one holding it far more reliably than it burns the one it is aimed at. I chose differently from clarity. The clarity that arrives when you stop organizing your life around other people's comfort and start telling the truth about your own. Dignity is not stubbornness. It is not cruelty. It is not the refusal to feel pain or to grieve something that genuinely mattered. Dignity is the knowledge that you do not owe anyone an easy story at the cost of an honest life. My grandfather built a house outside Cookeville, Tennessee in 1961. He built it himself over 2 years on evenings and weekends, poured the foundation, framed the walls, set the roof joists by hand. That house is still standing 63 years later. It will stand after I am gone. Not because it was the most impressive structure or the most expensive, because it was built right, because the foundation was true, because not one part of it was constructed on something that couldn't hold weight. I think about that house a great deal these days. I think about what I am building now, the work, the life, the relationship with Claire that is still finding its shape, and I think carefully about what it needs in order to stand. And I know now, in a way I am not sure I knew before any of this happened, exactly what kind of foundation I am willing to build on. My personal take: the engineering of dignity. What strikes me most about Nathan's story is the contrast between his methodical clarity and the manipulative, emotional language used by Brooks' family. When they told him to be mature, they weren't asking for maturity, they were asking for submission. They wanted him to swallow a massive betrayal to keep their family's facade intact. But Nathan is a structural engineer. He knows that you cannot build a skyscraper on a cracked foundation. An 11-month affair isn't a mistake. It's a parallel life. By gathering evidence for 8 weeks in silence, Nathan wasn't being cold. He was being precise. He protected his assets, his future, and his dignity because he understood that Brooke had already decided he didn't matter. My takeaway? Dignity is not negotiable. Being the bigger person doesn't mean carrying someone else's trash. It means having the self-respect to walk away from a structure that is no longer safe to inhabit. Nathan didn't just win a divorce. He reclaimed his own narrative. As he said, "You don't owe anyone an easy story at the cost of an honest life." He showed us that the best revenge isn't anger, it's indifference and a solid foundation for what's next.